contributor and a reporter for the Washington Post. Also with us, Ms. Jay Newton-Small, Time Magazine contributor and author of Broad Influence, How Women Are Changing the Way America Works. So nice to have you guys with us. Jay, let me begin with you because the reporting out of Washington from our Jeff Zeleny is that the president has given the directive that he will not let the government shut down on his watch. And then his chief of staff, Reince Priebus, seemed to sort of tip his hand a bit yesterday on Meet the Press. Listen.
It'll be enough in the negotiation for us to move forward with either the construction or the planning, or enough for us to move forward through the end of September to get going on the border wall and border security.
All right, and let's also bring Selena Zito into the conversation as well as I asked his first question. Jay, I mean, it seemed like Reince Priebus said, okay, maybe it doesn't have to be exactly money for an exactly, brick and mortar wall. It could be funding for border security. How far is the White House willing to push this one when it comes to the budget?
It seems that President Trump has certainly drawn a line in the sand and said, look, the way we want to cap the first 100 days is not by shutting down the government. And so he seems pretty adamant that whatever deal is made on Capitol Hill will include continued funding for the government. And that has really been the sticking point for Democrats, is whether or not you're going to have this money to build this wall. And the Democrats are basically saying, look, if you want our votes, if you want our support, you're going to have to get rid of that money. And we're not even and there was another proposal that was sort of saying, hey, we'll give you dollar for dollar funding for Obamacare, and that also was a non-starter with Democrats basically saying, nope, we've got the votes and you're going to have to come to us.
Yeah, and it's interesting, David Fahrenthold, because the White House keeps putting Republicans on Capitol Hill in this position, picking fights that may be unwinnable. Border wall funding might be unwinnable if Democrats are going to stand up against it. So what kind of a position does this put the Republicans in up there?
Well, it gives them remarkably little leverage, especially the House leadership. It gives them remarkably little leverage in a Congress where they control both houses. Because President Trump has sort of picked these fights that are always on a fast timetable, and because of the fast timetable, give a lot of leverage to Democrats, and particularly in this area where they were talking about fighting, trying to trade off a border wall, which is not that popular, and if they don't get it, they're going to kill off some Obamacare subsidies, which would be unpopular. There's not much leverage on either side of that fight. And so it gives Republicans remarkably little control over their agenda and also the speed at which they do these things.
Let's take a look at some of the new polling out this morning, polling that the president is taking issue with. He calls them fake news polls, but here are the polls. ABC News, Washington Post poll shows a very low approval rating, as we said, 42% for the president right now. But if you look, Jay, at his supporters, 96% of folks who voted for him said they would vote for him again. I mean, what do you make of that? They seem unfazed by the lack of legislative accomplishment outside of getting Gorsuch through.
Well, two things in that, Poppy. First of all, you have to remember that 56% of Americans actually voted against Donald Trump. And so those that did vote for Donald Trump are a minority, and they're clearly a very passionate minority. But what they really want to see from him and what he excels at is really the idea of disrupting Washington. So he's, blowing things up. He's taking on Congress. He's taking on the courts. And the more he does that, even if he doesn't achieve actual policy, doesn't achieve actual laws, they perceive him as really trying to mix things up in Washington, change things, and that's what they hunger for.
It's interesting, David, because the flip side of that, obviously, and it gets to what you were talking about, Ryan, the president is pressing all these buttons from a really weak negotiating point. His approval numbers are very, very low. Normally, historically, you wouldn't see a president try to push things through that may be difficult when your approval numbers are so low. Yet, it's never been that much better for Donald Trump. I mean, Donald Trump won an election with low approval ratings. So why should he change now?
Well, he's not in an election now. I think that's the most important thing. Hillary Clinton is in the woods of Chappaqua, and he doesn't have a foil to run against. He's talking about actually governing now. That's what the 100 days construct is. Artificial. Trump is right about that. Of course, he glommed onto it when he was running for office, but it's artificial. The question is, what's he going to do in his next 100 days? There's 100 days after that. What he's done so far, as you said, has really reduced his leverage with Congress, especially with Democrats in Congress, who he's going to need to get some of these things done. And so it doesn't give you a lot of hope that the second 100 days or the third 100 days are going to have much more success if he's burning bridges at this rate.
What's really interesting, guys? So the White House, in their readout of what's coming up this week, they talk about, and this is a quote, they are launching a webpage dedicated to the first 100 days. It will be with pronounced graphics, videos, and other digital content for the president's massive online following to share. Jay, what?
Well, I think they're just trying to claim any kind of victories. And look, he has had a few victories, certainly confirming a Supreme Court justice is a big victory, and he's actually signed more executive orders into law than any other president in recent history.
But they're highlighting the 100 days when he called it ridiculous. I guess that's my point.
Yeah, it's this thing where it's sort of, I mean, but it's like Donald Trump's always. It's sort of like, well, this is dumb, but let's find a way to win it anyway, right? I mean, and that's very much the way he's been throughout, is sort of calling into question Washington's norms, but then also still trying to win Washington's norms, and that is his style.
And they continue, the White House does and Donald Trump does, to try to frame this dialogue, this national discussion in a certain way. David Fahrenthold, Saturday nights, the White House Correspondents' Dinner, where look, if you go, I'm sure you'll be winning another award because that's all you do these days. but the president is not going. Right, he's going to go speak, in small town Pennsylvania to the people who helped get him into the White House, and I think that's a picture this White House is completely comfortable with.
Oh, of course, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. The White House Correspondents' Dinner is a weird institution, and if the president doesn't want to be part of it, that's completely fine. If he wants to go out and talk to people in Pennsylvania who voted for him, that's completely fine. The question is, what does he do when he comes back to Washington? Is what he does in Pennsylvania giving him some leverage over Congress, which is where the real fights of his presidency are going to happen?
Yeah, stay tuned for that. David Fahrenthold, Jay Newton Small, great to have you with us. Thanks so much, guys. How far